Across our world we live, in cities and villages, all part of a greater whole, but we are not alone. They come in herds, hives and swarms, prides, packs and pairs, living in nature, members of society. Deep in oceans and lakes, we find marine invertebrates, a group as widespread and complex as all invertebrates. They are a diverse group of distantly related families and species sharing but a few common traits, the primary signifier being the total absence of an internal skeleton, coming either in gelatinous or fleshy forms, or with a hard calcified surface texture or exoskeleton. While a great many species are active and highly mobile and recognizably animalistic in behavior, the majority of marine invertebrates are generally highly sedentary, spending most of their lives in the same location with minimal locomotion. One of the most common and essential forms of marine invertebrates, in fact often being mistaken as completely inanimate, corals. A unique group of primitive invertebrates identified by their distinct outward appearance known as a polyp, a small round animal fixed on the ocean floor with a central oral cavity of sorts surrounded by a ring of tentacles of varying size and shape. Lacking any advanced sensory organs, nervous system or intelligence, they operate entirely on instinct. They evolved over 500 million years ago. Individually, polyps may range in size from less than a quarter of an inch in length to over a foot across. They can be found in nearly all tropical and subtropical waters, with some species surviving even in much deeper and colder temperate waters. Corals are often partially predatory, feeding on either fish or plankton, which may be caught by the stinging tentacles surrounding their oral cavity, paralyzing their prey, pulling it into its mouth, digesting it and expelling it the same way, though they commonly acquire most of their nutrients and energy from photosynthetic microorganisms living within their tissue, a group of algae known as dinoflagellates. The algae existing in symbiotic relationship with the polyp, providing energy to the coral through photosynthesis, in exchange for consuming carbon dioxide and waste products excreted by the polyp, though this process may sometimes put significant strain on the polyp, leading to the polyp sometimes ejecting the algae if put under additional environmental stress such as temperature changes or pollution, saving the polyp temporarily until conditions change and the algae are regained, though if stressful conditions persist, the coral dies out of starvation. A phenomenon known as coral bleaching, as the algae are often responsible for the coloration of brown corals, many corals to turn white or gray upon expelling their algae. Many polyps secreting a hard circular substance known as a corallite under their skin, giving the coral its name, made out of calcium carbonate, forming a hard exoskeleton around its base, permanently attaching the polyp to the solid surface underneath it. Radiating outwards from its center, the corallite leaves only a small opening of the oral cavity, causing it to be incredibly dense and immensely strong, adding additional corallite to the outer layers over time, extending the base upwards while keeping the living tissue at the top, to build up closer to the surface to receive more sunlight for photosynthesis. They are most commonly found in large colonies of dozens, if not hundreds, of individual polyps, either horizontal across the surface in mounds or plates along the seafloor, or in vertical branching patterns not unlike plant life, with their massive corallite deposits occasionally forming large coral reefs, often in waters with few other sources of nutrients, built up over hundreds, even thousands of years of corallite deposits as corals instinctively built taller and taller structures to further approach the sunlight. As ocean levels have gradually risen in the wake of the last glacial period, with most reefs having been formed by volcanic islands subsiding underwater, fringing reefs surrounding the islands forming a shallow lagoon as a result, often called the rainforest of the seas. Coral reefs not only function as a large superstructure for the coral colonies themselves, but also functioning as a diverse marine ecosystem in and of itself. While coral reefs only make up 0.1% of the ocean surface, they are home to over a quarter of all marine life. The intricate layers and branching structures of the corallite allowing highly nutritious spaces for microorganisms and other polyps, further providing habitats for all kinds of fish, mollusks, sponges, worms and crustaceans. Even though they are seldom directly preyed upon by other animals, its continuous life cycle providing further habitat construction for other animals. Coral reproduction may be either asexual or sexual, depending on the current stage in the coral's life cycle, with indirect sexual reproduction being the most common, using a method of broadcasting spawn. Most corals being hermaphroditic, containing both sperm and eggs, with the majority of all hermaphroditic corals being broadcasters. Each individual polyp releasing a mixture of eggs and sperms, known as gametes, into the water to be caught by the current through asynchronous spawning, mixing with the gametes of other polyps for fertilization. Even with multiple species entering into the same synchronous spawning, determining the time to release gametes through environmental cues, while a few species are brooders, only releasing sperm, which then sinks onto the waiting egg carrier polyps below. Both methods occasionally leading to a hybridization of coral species, with hybrids, unlike other, more complex animals, being fertile as well. Multi-generational hybridization eventually leading to a new speciation of corals. After spawning, the fertilized egg and sperm then fuse to enter into a larval form known as a planula. A small, often pink, elliptical shape and with only primitive means of instinctive locomotion, with most species seeking light to utilize photosynthesis for growth, prior to attaching to a hard surface. A process which usually takes only 2 to 3 days, but may take up to 2 months. Once the larvae lets itself sink onto the ocean floor, it attaches itself to the nearest hard surface, after which asexual reproduction begins. Polyps may reproduce by budding, wherein a small individual polyp begins as an outgrowth from an adult polyp, either from the oral disc or from its base, slowly distancing itself from the original polyp and developing its own discrete body parts, or by division, where the polyp splits in two, and both halves regenerate the lost tissue to become as large as the original. Both methods forming a so-called coral head group with a larger colony, though some coral heads may expand to significant sizes, even to the point of becoming the equivalent size of an entire colony of its own, making each individual polyp capable of producing an entire colony. Whole colonies additionally being able to reproduce asexually, forming 2 genetically identical colonies, either by fission, bailout, or fragmentation. Fission being most common, the entire colony splitting in 2 during the early stages of its development, while bailout occurs when a single polyp abandons the colony, typically either in an early stage of the calcification, when the polyp may detach more easily, or by lengthy outgrowths. Fragmentation being individual polyps forcibly broken off from the colony by storms or other disruptions. The asexually produced offsprings remains genetically identical to the original polyp. Polyp life cycles abandoning the linear progression of stages found with most other animals, instead progressing by any and all means available, lifespans varying between 2 years for the average polyp up to hundreds of years, as polyps continue to grow and generate new living tissue as long as it continues to successfully maintain a symbiotic relationship with their algae. Colonies continually renewing themselves, surviving up to thousands of years. Few marine invertebrates are as commonplace or as recognizable as the jellyfish, found in every ocean on the planet at every depth. They are primarily marine animals, though some may also be found in freshwater lakes and ponds. They are among the oldest living groups of animals, having evolved over 700 million years ago. They have remained largely unchanged since then. All closely related to corals and anemones, they are as diverse as they are widespread, being spread out across 4 classes, dozens of families, and hundreds of species, with additional groups such as the Portuguese man-of-war and the comb jellies often being confused or conflated with the true jellyfish, though they are only distantly related. They may range in size from less than 1/10 of an inch in diameter to nearly 7 feet across, with their tentacles and mouthparts becoming as long as 120 feet for some species. Their primary form being immediately recognizable for their soft bodies and gelatinous umbrella-shaped bell and trailing tentacles, known as their medusa form, being the last life stage of most jellyfish. As jellyfish development typically occurs in phases which may vary between species, commonly ranging from fertilized eggs to larval stage known as planulae, being free-floating gelatinous blobs searching for a permanent feeding site. Once attached to the sea floor, the jellyfish goes through a lengthy polyp stage, most polyps being only millimeters in size and often indistinguishable from coral polyps. Jellyfish polyps may be either solitary or colonial, with colonial polyps sharing a single stomach cavity through what is known as a strobulation, feeding continuously for a period of months, sometimes even years, with the transition from polyp to fully formed jellyfish often being seasonally linked. When the climate is found to be favorable, usually in the warmer months, the polyp will then trigger the next stage. A fleeting ephira, a free-swimming partially formed medusa. It then develops into a full-sized medusa shortly thereafter, growing steadily until fully reproductive, continuing until its death. While a few species may go directly from egg to medusa or from egg to polyp, skipping the intermediate steps entirely. These drastic transformations are made possible through their physical simplicity, consisting of up to 98% of water. Their soft bodies containing the absolute minimum of required organs, often being partially or almost completely transparent as a result. Lacking any form of digestive, respiratory or circulatory system. Having only a loose network of nerves as opposed to a central nervous system, enabling a basic sense of touch through a distributed net of independent nerve cells throughout its body. With some species also having light-sensitive organs that can enable them to differentiate night from day. Their bodies instead primarily being composed of a gastrovascular cavity where digestion takes place and nutrients are absorbed, as well as crude muscle rings for locomotion for the mobile stages of their life cycle, making jellyfish among the most energy-efficient swimmers of all animals, moving through the water by radically expanding and contracting their bell-shaped bodies to push water behind them. Though they only have a limited control over the precise direction of their movements, most willingly floating along with the ocean current. In their medusa form, jellyfish also exhibit a varying degree of articulated tentacles, threads and oral arms as means of drawing food in. As medusa are exclusively carnivorous, feeding on plankton, crustaceans, smaller fish and fish eggs, as well as other jellyfish. Hunting passively using their tentacles as drift nets, with most species additionally having the ability to sting their prey through thread-like tentacles with specialized stinging cells known as nematocysts, piercing the skin of its victim to inject various forms of venom, either inducing paralysis or death in their intended prey. Stinging their prey into submission and bringing them into the gastric cavity for digestion, expelling the remains through the same opening, some being considerably deadly even to large animals as a means of self-defense. While many polyps are either plankton feeders or even survive by photosynthesis, much like their coral counterparts. Despite having little to no means of communication whatsoever, jellyfish may still be found in huge numbers on occasion. Aggregations of jellyfish often being known as blooms or swarms, sometimes making up hundreds of thousands of individuals, often linked to prey abundance or favorable climate. Jellyfish being able to survive even in the most oxygen-deprived waters, unlike other plankton feeders. Large congregations of jellyfish is often also a direct result of an often fast reproductive cycle, with generations being born passing through the phases of their life cycle and reproducing repeatedly in a single area. Jellyfish may reproduce both sexually and asexually, with male, female, as well as hermaphrodite individuals. Given enough food, most medusa spawn daily, usually synchronized within groups at either dawn or dusk. The males releasing sperm alongside the females who release their eggs. The unprotected eggs become fertilized in the very same instant and quickly enter the larval stage. Or as with moon jellies, the sperm will enter the female's body directly, where it develops through its larval stage before dispersal. Once developed into a polyp, they may then reproduce asexually by budding or growing genetically identical clones as outgrowths, producing both additional polyps as well as ephirae or other larval forms. While a few species can reproduce asexually by budding from the medusa stage as well, such as by fission, where an individual may electively or forcibly be split in two, the tissue of both halves regenerating to form a whole. Jellyfish lifespans can vary considerably, with polyps lasting for years, while some medusa may only last for mere days or even a few hours, while a handful of species may effectively be immortal by being able to revert back to the polyp stage even after reproducing, and once again emerging as a medusa when conditions allow. Though most large coastal jellyfish last on average 2 to 6 months, the biggest threat to jellyfish being in their medusa form, as the polyps are seldom targeted for predation. the threat stemming primarily from other jellyfish, some of which may specialize in preying on other species of jellyfish, though cannibalism may also occur. Other predators may include tuna, sea turtles, and sharks, though these instances are rare, with jellyfish in most areas being the top predators of their habitat, not only feeding on fish eggs and smaller or juvenile fish, but also being a formidable competitor for food resources to larger marine animals as well. Octopuses, also known as octopods. With over 300 species described, they make up the largest majority of cephalopod mollusks. A group also including squids, cuttlefish, and the nautiloids, further related to snails and slugs, along with clams, oysters, and scallops. They are immediately recognizable for their large, almost entirely soft body, devoid of any internal shell or bone. The only hard part commonly being a bony beak made out of chitin, as well as their 8 characteristic arms, usually with suction cups, distinct from the longer feeding tentacles of squids and nautiloids. Used both for locomotion across the sea floor by walking as well as for swimming, though octopuses may also utilize jet propulsion of water as an alternate means for swimming, forcibly ejecting a stream of water sucked in through the gills by a series of muscles coming out through 2 muscular siphons for precise aiming, enabling a fast escape or pursuit. Octopuses range in size from the largest, the giant Pacific octopus, confirmed to weigh up to 150 pounds with a full body length of nearly 10 feet, to the smallest, the octopus wolfie, weighing less than a 20th of an ounce at less than 1 inch in length. Females of all species being typically larger, sometimes by an extreme difference in size. The blanket octopus female at 6 feet long being nearly 100 times longer than the male, weighing nearly 40,000 times the weight. Octopuses may also inhabit a wide variety of marine environments, including coral reefs, the open ocean, and the ocean floor itself. Able to adapt to nearly any climate, from inhabiting polar waters to hydrothermal vents with temperatures exceeding 300 degrees Celsius, most being able to survive outside of water for extended periods of time as well, though they are exclusively found in saltwater environments, unable to cope with the osmotic change of staying in a non-saline environment. Unlike squids, most octopuses also notably lack a hard bony mantle encompassing the head, the octopus mantle instead remaining almost entirely gelatinous, enabling the octopus to squeeze itself into nearly any small crevice or crawl space to avoid detection. Only a few deep water species retaining a small internal shell and fins on either side of their heads. Despite being among the most intelligent of all marine invertebrates, with significant pattern recognition behavior, long-term memory capabilities, and problem-solving skills, including primitive tool usage and dexterity. As all are exclusively predatory, feeding on a variety of fish, crabs, prawns, marine worms, clams, and squids, even other octopuses, using a variety of tactics to trap and manipulate their prey, all species also being venomous by varying degrees, most commonly injecting their prey with a paralytic agent before dismembering it with their small beaks. Hunting strategies varying, but commonly consisting of some form of ambush or brief active pursuit. The octopus lying in wait among corals or on the ocean floor, waiting for the suitable prey to pass by close enough to provoke it to attack, wrapping its arms around its prey and quickly piercing its skin with its horny beak to inject the venom. Many species also having the ability of camouflage, using specialized reflective skin cells known as chromatophores, containing many different colored pigments allowing it to reflect light of differing wavelengths, thus controlling its color, patterning, and apparent opacity at will. Additional musculature in the skin allowing significant changes of surface texture as well in some species. Able to take on the appearance of seaweed, corals, and rocks, both to ambush prey and to communicate, unable to use any form of vocal communication, instead relying on changing intricate color patterns to signal intent, though the primary use of this camouflage is to avoid predators. Most octopuses also eject a thick blackish ink in self-defense when cornered by a predator, enabling it a means of escape by blocking its pursuer's vision as well as olfactory sense. Some octopuses also able to perform arm autonomy, or the voluntary detachment of one or more of its arms to distract a predator when under direct attack. Most octopuses are highly solitary, rarely socializing in any significant way with other octopuses outside of mating season, as most octopuses are also highly aggressive and opportunistic, many species not being above cannibalism for sustenance. Mating season for octopuses vary greatly between species, many species only being able to mate once before dying, typically occurring shortly after maturity at between 1 to 3 years of age. Typically initialized by the male, it may approach the female in one of two ways, either by mounting her by grabbing all of her arms at once, common with species with shorter arms where the male is of nearly equal size as the female, or by reaching over to the female only with their specialized mating arm, typically being the third arm on the right, allowing him to keep the rest of his body at a distance to more easily avoid being victimized by the female. The male then uses the mating arm, also known as a hectocytolus, to transfer packets of sperm from his reproductive organ into the female siphon. The arm may then sometimes detach from the male's body, remaining in the female's mental cavity to ensure fertilization occurs while the male escapes, particularly common among species where the male is significantly smaller than the female. Some species even able to detach the mating arm prior to mating, the arm making its way by itself to the female siphon opening. Most males who survive the encounter live only to die a few months later, while some species may engage in territorial mate guarding behavior, mating repeatedly before egg laying. After fertilization, the female establishes a rocky den in an underwater cave or crevice, where she lays on average between 20,000 to 400,000 eggs over the course of several days, with the incubation period lasting for 5 to 8 months, during which time the female carefully tends to her eggs, cleaning them and blowing water over them to aerate the eggs, to ensure proper embryonic development, all the while foregoing any foraging behavior, leading to its eventual death from starvation shortly after the hatching of her eggs. The baby octopus emerges as a miniaturized version of its parents, often pale in color or transparent and very small, the hatchlings of even the largest species being no bigger than a grain of rice, growing incredibly quickly as their cold-blooded nature also allows the young to convert nearly all consumed energy into body mass rather than attempt to regulate body temperature. The vast majority of all hatchlings die, however, within the first few weeks of life. Often less than a dozen survive longer than a few months. The average lifespan for most octopuses being 1 to 3 years, with only a few species extending up to 5 years in the wild. Octopuses, just like coral polyps and jellyfish, form a central component in their marine environment, either as predator or prey, or even just as a creator of their own habitat, sharing their lives with thousands of other marine animals, large and small, every part of the life cycle, an integral element in the circle of life at large, each of them a member of an animal society.